Chapter 1. I drop my bag in the back room and yank open the old cedar chest, its hinges groaning like they haven't moved in years. Dust rises in thin spirals, catching the weak light from the single bulb overhead, and the air carries the layered scent of old wood, dried lavender from some forgotten sachet, and the faint trace of cedar oil that never quite fades. Mom's voice drifts in from the kitchen, sharp and steady, listing the linen bills still sitting unpaid on the counter. Each word lands with the weight of another obligation I had hoped to leave behind at school. My fingers catch on the rough edge of something inside, and I pull until the worn leather cover comes free. The journal falls open to grandmother's handwriting. Rows of herb ratios inked so neat they almost look printed. The smell hits first, dried sage and something sharper, like the air after a rain on the mountain trail, pulling me back to afternoons spent measuring leaves on the kitchen table, while she explained why balance mattered more than abundance. Mom appears in the doorway before I can close it. She stands with her arms crossed tight over her apron, the one with the faded mountain outline stitched at the hem. Shadows from the hallway stretch across her face, and I notice the new lines around her eyes that weren't there when I left. The seasonal deposit goes if we don't lock in the manager slot by the end of the month, she says. No hello, no question about the drive back from college. Just that measured tone she uses when the numbers are already stacked against us. I feel the words settle in my chest like stones dropped one by one. I tuck the journal under my apron and smooth the fabric flat with one hand, the leather edge pressing cool against my hip. What if we swap the rosemary and the breakfast muffins for thyme? It would stretch the supply we have left. The suggestion feels small even as it leaves my mouth, a test more than an offer. She glances at the reservation log instead, flipping pages like the suggestion never landed, her fingers tapping the edge of the counter in a rhythm that matches the ticking clock above the door. The space between us fills with everything unsaid. My absence, her exhaustion, the way the inn has always demanded more than either of us could give. Vin leans against the front counter when I step out, his posture easy even with a guest hovering nearby. Trail map's upside down in your pack, he tells the older man, voice light but not mocking, his eyes flicking briefly toward me before returning to the guest. His hand slips across the wood and leaves a folded list of local foragers behind the tone, the kind of quiet handoff that doesn't ask for thanks. I catch his eye for half a second before he straightens and starts pointing out the window at the ridge, the easy grin he offers the guest never quite reaching the concern that lingers in his glance at me. The list sits warm in my pocket now, a small bridge I am not sure I want to cross. Mom wipes the same stretch of counter twice, the cloth moving in tight circles that match the rhythm of her breathing. That degree doesn't count for much if the books stay this thin, she says, eyes on the surface like the grain might answer back. I knot the apron ties twice around my waist, fingers working the fabric until it bites, each pull a reminder of how quickly the old patterns reclaim space. The list from Vin sits heavy in my pocket, its edges sharp against my palm. Outside, the herb beds look thinner than I remember, mint crowding the time like it always does when no one has time to pull it back. Wind moves through the rows in low whispers, carrying the cool bite of evening and the distant smell of pine needles drying on the slope. A single page from the journal sticks to the sole of my shoe, pressed flat from the walk. The faded ink reads about choosing between the knife and the ledger. I fold it small and slide it into the same pocket as the forger list before heading back in, the paper crinkling softly with each step like a secret I have already begun to keep. Dinner service starts with the usual low hum of guests settling into chairs, the scrape of wood on wood, and the soft clink of glasses settling into place. Vin cracks the joke about city knives meeting mountain heat while he plates the last salad, but the words land flat when I keep my gaze on the pass. He straightens so fast the tray nearly tips, his shoulders tightening as if the silence itself has weight. I focus on the steam rising from the soup instead, the way it curls and disappears before it reaches the ceiling, carrying away the brief warmth of the kitchen. Mom steps into the empty dining room after the last plate clears and says the words like she's practicing them alone. I won't let this place slip the way hers did. Her hands rest on the back of a chair, knuckles pale against the wood, and the tremor in her voice is the only crack in the practiced line. I don't answer. The journal waits upstairs, its pages already pulling at the edge of my thoughts, each recipe a thread I am afraid to tug. In my room, the hallway clock pushes past midnight with every second-hand sweep. I open the journal on my lap, the first recipe for a simple stock staring back in grandmother's careful lines. The measurements feel like a language I half forgot while I was gone, each number carrying the memory of steam rising and the quiet satisfaction of watching something simple become enough. My thumb traces the ratio of bay to peppercorn until the paper warms under my skin. Questions blooming in the quiet. How much of this life can I still claim without losing the one I tried to build elsewhere? A text lights the phone screen. Ina is asking if I'm back for good, the words short and bright like she already knows the answer. I type 3 versions and delete each one, the screen glow dimming with every backspace until the battery cuts out completely. The room stays quiet except for the clock and the faint creak of the old floorboard settling. The mountain ridge visible through the window cutting a dark line against the sky that makes the inn feel both smaller and heavier than it did when I packed to leave for college. The journal page with the knife and ledger note sits on the nightstand where I left it. I reach for it once, then pull my hand back, the decision hanging between my fingers like the choice itself has already begun to shape the hours ahead. Chapter 2. The stream cuts cold against my fingers while I kneel on the damp bank, Vin's crumpled list guiding every careful pluck of wild thyme. Dew beads on the stems and soaks the knees of my jeans, but the scent rises sharp and green, exactly the note the journal demands for the stock base. My breath fogs once before the mountain air pulls it thin. I work fast, alone, because the recipe only unlocks if the ingredient comes without anyone watching. The water numbs my knuckles, and a faint current tugs at the loose soil under my boots, carrying away the smallest leaves I drop. I pause to check the list again, tracing the precise measurements grandmother once wrote in the margins. Alone feels safer. The journal had warned that shared hands dilute the attunement, though it never explained why. My shoulders hunch against the chill, and I wonder how many more solitary harvests the next pages will require before the flashes stop leaving me hollow. A twig snaps on the path above. Inez steps into view with 2 market baskets looped over her arms, her steps already carrying that forward tilt like she is halfway to the next idea. "Nor, you're up early," she says, words tumbling quick before I can straighten. "Perfect, because the summer festival booth needs deciding and the inn's front lawn is the only spot with shade. We could do tasting stations, maybe a live demo if your mom signs off." She shifts one basket higher on her hip, eyes bright with the kind of plans that usually pull everyone along whether they want it or not. I twist the last bundle into my palm and stand, the time damp against my skin. "I was just getting this for the kitchen," I manage, voice low. The journal's first attunement still sits heavy behind my ribs, and the idea of turning the inn into a stage makes my fingers tighten around the stems. Sourcing runs are already tight this week. Maybe we skip the demo and keep it simple. Ines doesn't slow. She sets one basket down and keeps talking about permits and foot traffic until the words blur. Her hands gesture wide, sketching out tables and signs in the air between us, and I catch the faint scent of yeast still clinging to her sleeves from whatever she baked before dawn. I try again, nodding toward the stream. This time has to steep before the others wake. Can we talk sourcing routes instead? She laughs, light and quick, and steps closer, her boots leaving prints that overlap mine on the muddy bank. She pulls me into a hug before I can step back. Cinnamon clings to her sweater from some early baking, and underneath it, the faded trace of summers we spent racing between the inn's porch and the orchard. My shoulders stay rigid for a second too long, the thyme bundle crushed between us, its crushed leaves releasing a sharper note that mixes with the cinnamon. Inez's arms are warm and steady, the same way they always were when we hid from chores as children, but now the pressure feels like an anchor I cannot shake loose. She lets go with a small laugh that doesn't quite cover the question in her eyes, a flicker of concern that lingers even as she bends to retrieve her baskets. Back in the kitchen, the thyme steeps in the pot while the others sleep. Steam rises in thin ribbons, and I stir in the exact ratios grandmother wrote, the same way I used to watch her do when I was small enough to need a stool. The first flash hits without warning, her voice low and certain, telling me duty without choice burns the tongue the same way. Too much heat sears a reduction. My hand jerks on the spoon and broth splashes the counter. The memory unfolds in fragments. Grandmother's lined face bent over the same pot, her eyes narrowing as she tasted and decided the balance was off, the weight of her expectations pressing down like the steam itself. I taste metal on my tongue and wonder what choice I have already surrendered without noticing. I wipe it up fast, the cloth rough under my palm. The memory leaves a metal-sharp aftertaste on the back of my teeth, like the soup itself is asking what I am willing to give up to keep tasting it. My pulse settles slow, the way it always does when the attunement lands, and then leaves me more untethered than before. The kitchen feels smaller now, the shadows under the counters deeper, and I catch myself glancing toward the hallway as if the next voice might belong to someone who already knows the price. Finn's boots sound in the hallway. I turn the burner low and step out, apron tie already twisted twice around my fingers. He leans against the front desk the way he always does, casual, until Lael appears from the office with a clipboard. Finn, the wiring in the East Wing still needs checking, Lael says, her voice even and practical, eyes on the list instead of him. Seasonal runs can wait until we have the guest count stable. She adds his name to the roster in permanent marker before he answers, her pen pressing hard enough to dent the paper beneath. Vin's posture shifts, one hand rising halfway as if to object, then dropping again when her gaze finally lifts. I come forward flushed from the stove heat. The time worked, I tell Vin. First flash hit clean, but it left everything feeling off balance. My free hand stays busy with the tie, knotting and unknotting the fabric. It was grandmother's voice again. She said something about duty, but I can't shake the taste it left. Vin straightens, the teasing cadence dropping out of his next sentence. Mountain air fixes most things eventually, he says, but his gaze drops to my shaking fingers before he looks away again. He does not ask what the flash showed, and the silence stretches while he studies the corkboard instead. Lael pins the new roster to the corkboard by the desk. My name runs down every column for the next 2 weeks. Vin's name sits beneath mine in the same bold strokes. She wipes the counter once, hard, then walks back toward the office without another word, the clipboard tucked tight against her side like a shield. The marker lines gleam under the hallway light, fresh and unyielding. That night, the hallway clock keeps its steady sweep while I lie on top of the covers, the journal open on my chest. The memory of grandmother's warning loops again, mixing with Enos's plans and Lael's measured instructions until the room feels smaller than the mountain outside. I replay the flash and fragments, searching for what grandmother had left unsaid, and the question of the next attunement presses heavier with each passing minute. My thumb traces the fresh margin note that was not there this morning, balances measured in what you stopped tasting. The page warms under my skin the same way the stock had earlier, but the question it leaves tastes sharper than any broth I have ever made. Chapter 3. I find Geed on the porch where the boards sag under the weight of last winter's snow, still not fixed. The wood gives slightly beneath my steps, a soft give that echoes the way the inn itself seems to settle each evening. He stands with arms crossed tight, staring at the line of pine trees that mark the edge of the inn property. Their needles catch the last slant of light, turning the shadows between trunks into long, uncertain stripes. The time flash sits heavy in my mouth, all sharp edges and grandmother's voice repeating duty like it was a lock on every door. I taste it again now, the way the stalk had bloomed across my tongue earlier, carrying that familiar sternness beneath the herbs. The memory came through the stalk, I say, my fingers already tugging at the apron ties even though the knot is already loose. Grandmother talked about balance, but it felt like she was warning me off something. Like the flavors pulled too much from one place. Geedy turns his head just enough to listen, but his shoulders stay locked, the line of his jaw set against whatever might follow. A breeze stirs the pine boughs, carrying the faint resin scent that always lingers near the property line. 2 details, he says, voice flat and quick. That's all you get before it turns into chasing smoke. I push the next sentence out anyway, careful and slow like I'm measuring salt. The words feel fragile on my tongue, as if speaking them might scatter them before they reach him. It tasted like the inn was holding something back from me, like the recipe knew I might leave again. He cuts the air with one short shake of his head, the motion precise and final. Prep work waits in the kitchen. Ghosts in the journal do not season the plates. His arms stay crossed, the fabric of his sleeves pulling tight across his forearms, and he steps past me toward the door without another word. The screen swings shut behind him with a small creak that feels final, the hinges protesting like they too have grown weary of repeated openings and closings. The linen closet smells like starch and old cedar when I reach it, the air thick with the sharp bite of pressed fabric. I pull out a stack of towels and start folding, each corner lined up too exactly, the fabric pulled tight until my knuckles ache from the tension. The replay of Geedy's dismissal loops, mixing with the flash until my chest tightens around the same question. What if the attunement keeps taking pieces I cannot name? My hands keep moving, smoothing, and refolding the same towel 3 times while the hallway clock ticks past the hour, each second marking another layer of doubt I cannot shake. The cedar scent clings to my sleeves, grounding me even as my thoughts drift back to the porch, to the way Gita's eyes had never quite met mine. Lael's voice drifts from the cracked office door down the hall, low and even like she was reading a list. If Noor leaves again, the inn goes on the market by fall. We cannot keep the doors open on memory alone. The words land like cold broth on my tongue, and I freeze mid-fold, the towel half creased in my grip. The phrase repeats in my head louder than any recipe, if she leaves. The attunement's off-balance taste surges back, sharper now, as if the journal already knew the cost would land here, in the space between staying and the mountain deciding for me. I strain to catch more, but only the soft rustle of papers follows, the click of a receiver settling into its cradle. My pulse quickens against the folded linen, each beat pressing the possibility deeper. My breath comes shallow while I stand there, the closet door half open, listening to her hang up and shuffle papers. The journal's margin note from last night burns behind my eyes, balance is measured in what you stop tasting. I wonder if that stop is already happening, if the duty in the flash was never about cooking, but about the choice Lael is making without asking. The starch scent rises again as I clutch the towel closer, its crisp edge biting into my palm. I step out into the hallway and find Gate again near the back stairs, his posture the same closed line. The wood beneath his feet creaks once, a quiet acknowledgement of movement. One question about the journal, I say, voice softer than I mean it to be, the words threading between us like an offering he might still refuse. Does the attunement ever show the future instead of the past? He nods once, the movement small and final, then walks away down the stairs without turning. The clean knife appears in my station later, set beside the cutting board like it always belongs there, no note attached. Its blade catches the overhead light in a clean flash, the handle worn smooth from years of use, and I wonder whether this is his way of bridging the distance he left on the porch. Vin's text arrives while I am still in the closet doorway, a photo of small dark peppercorns scattered across his palm with a caption that reads, "Found these near the trail, proof the mountain wants us to stay forever." The image lingers on the screen, the peppercorns gleaming like polished stones against his skin. I type a full sentence about the inn may be selling, delete it. Type another about the balance warning, delete that too, and send only thanks before I can add anything else. The single word sits there, stark and insufficient, yet the safest choice amid the swirl of what I cannot voice. The kitchen stays quiet after that. I slice onions for the next prep list, the blade steady even though my thoughts keep circling the phone call. The attunement cost feels closer now, not just a missing flavor, but the possibility that the inn's future is already written without my name in it. Each cut releases a sharp, clean sting that clears the air around me. Night comes with the hallway clock sweeping its same steady arc. I lie on top of the covers again, the journal open but unread on my chest. Lael's footsteps pass outside the door once, then twice, the sound of someone securing what they think belongs to them. The question from the flash sits heavier. What if the balance grandmother meant is the one where I stop tasting the choice to leave it all? The boards outside creak once more, and the weight of the inn settles around me, its silence holding answers I am not yet ready to hear. Chapter 4. The kitchen finally empties at 10 past midnight. Geddy's last pan clatters into the drying rack with a metal-sharp finality that echoes off the tiled walls, and he mutters about early herbs before the door swings shut behind him. I wait another 10 minutes, apron ties twisted so tightly between my fingers that the fabric creases into sharp lines against my skin. The air still holds the faint residue of garlic and oil from dinner service, a reminder that the space belongs to someone else until these small hours. Only then do I pull the journal from the bottom drawer where I hid it earlier that evening, its leather cover cool and slightly damp from the drawer's humidity. Grandmother's rule sits plain on the page. 1 attunement a week, no more. But the balance entry already feels like it is tugging at the next one. An invisible thread pulling at the edges of my resolve. I measure the rice anyway. The grains cool and even against my palm, each one slipping through my fingers with a soft whisper, and set the pot on the burner with the lid slightly off so the steam can rise slow. Steam begins to fill the space above the pot, soft at first, then thicker, carrying the faint green scent of wild thyme still left from last week's batch. My hands stay steady on the spoon, but my chest tightens the way it does when the mountain air turns too still before a storm. The memory arrives in fragments, not like a film but like a smell I'd forgot I knew. Lael at 20, standing in the same doorway with a scholarship letter crumpled in her fist. She had just buried her own mother. The inn's ledgers lay spread across the table like open wounds, ink bleeding where her hands had rested too long. She said no to the city program without raising her voice once. I can almost hear the quiet finality in that single word, the way it settled over the room like dust after a door closes. The steam thickens now, and I see her shoulders square the same way they do when she wipes the counters at closing, as if the motion itself keeps everything from coming undone. I reach too late for the pan. The rice sticks at the bottom, edges turning hard and pale, the whole dish losing whatever lift the herbs were meant to give it. My hands shake as I lift it off the heat, the tremor running up to my elbows until the spoon clatters against the counter. The taste when I try a single grain is flat, nothing like the layered thing the journal promised. Anxiety curls tighter behind my ribs, the kind that makes me count steps instead of breaths, anything to keep the silence from pressing in. A light knock sounds on the door, familiar in its rhythm. Nor? Fresh mint from the lower trail. Thought you might want it for whatever you're testing at this hour. Vin's voice carries that teasing cadence he uses when he is trying to pull someone out of their own head without asking what is wrong. I stay on the other side, fingers still locked on the apron ties, my pulse loud in my ears as I imagine the mint's sharp coolness cutting through the burned haze. The pause stretches. I picture him straightening against the frame, waiting, and the image makes my throat tighten. I'm fine, I say, the words smaller than I planned. Just cleaning up. He does not push, but the silence on his side lasts long enough that I hear the faint shift of his weight, the soft scuff of his boot against the step before he leaves the bundle. Through the wood, I catch the faint rustle of the paper wrapping, and for a moment I wonder if he can smell the failure drifting under the door. Lael finds the journal later, open to the grief page where grandmother sketched the balance warning in tight script. She stands at the counter and wipes it 3 times, the cloth moving in the same tight circles each pass, her shoulders rigid under the kitchen light. I watch her from the doorway, noting how her mouth presses into a line that holds back whatever she might say. She does not ask about the second attunement or the burned rice. Instead, she sets the cloth down and says the front desk needs someone steady in the morning. I nod without meeting her eyes and tell her Veen can handle it, the excuse tasting as flat as the rice still clinging to the pan. The weight of her silence lingers between us like an unasked question. Morning arrives with the same hallway clock arc. I skip the desk entirely, texting guests that Vin will bring their keys and maps instead. My phone screen blurs at the edges from another night of counting recipe steps to keep the thoughts quiet. The attunement cost sits heavier now. The flat rice still on my tongue like a reminder that some memories do not want to be pulled forward. I avoid the kitchen too, circling the back paths where the peppercorns Vin found still scatter near the trail, their sharp scent rising each time my foot brushes them. Vin leaves the thermos outside my door before lunch, the note tucked under the lid in his quick handwriting. The inn can survive one quiet day. I read it twice, the paper warm from the tea inside, then slide it under my pillow without answering. The thermos stays untouched on the floor, mint steam rising through the crack in the door, the same way the memory steam did earlier. My fingers twitch toward the journal again, but I pull them back and count the steps for a simple stalk instead, 1 through 10 and back again, each number a small anchor. Night settles without the usual footsteps on the stairs. Lael stays downstairs longer than usual, the sound of papers shuffling drifting up like distant waves. I lie on top of the covers with the journal closed on my chest, the new margin note appearing in fresh ink while I stare at the ceiling. Some memories demand silence before they release you. The words sit there like an answer to the question I asked Gate days ago, and the weight of it presses against the choice between staying and leaving that still has no clear shape. I think about texting Vin back, about the way his note offered space without demanding the full story, but the phone stays dark beside the bed. The inn's silence stretches around the unopened thermos, around the flat rice still scraped into the compost bin, around the scholarship Lael never took. Another attunement feels closer than it should, the cost already threading through my hands, that will not quite stop shaking when I reach for the journal again. Chapter 5. Ines bursts through the back door with rolled banners tucked under both arms, the edges already fraying from how tight she's gripping them. The kitchen air thickens with the scent of simmering stock, and the faint metal-sharp bite of the dishwasher's steam, while the hallway clock's steady tick seems to press against the walls. Noor, you have to try this fusion thing I sketched last night, she says, voice bright and fast like she's already sold the whole town on it. Her eyes flick across the counters without settling, as if scanning for obstacles she can simply talk past. I'm standing at the prep counter with the journal half hidden under a stack of napkins, still tasting the flat rice from the last attunement on the back of my tongue. The memory lingers like an unfinished sentence. She unrolls one banner across the cutting board and the fabric knocks the pepper grinder sideways, scattering a few dark grains that cling to the wood grain. Tourists want something that feels local but not boring. We do your grandmother's base with a twist, maybe the thyme from the ridge folded into a scallop thing. It'll photograph well, too. Everyone's posting their plates these days. I hesitate, fingers finding the apron ties without thinking, twisting the fabric into a loose knot that digs into my palm. The attunement needs quiet, I say, the words coming out slower than I mean, each one carrying the weight of the ridge path I should be walking alone right now. If I rush it, the flavors lock up. Ines just nods once like she's heard me and keeps talking, already pulling ingredients from the reach and with quick, decisive movements that send the cooler door swinging shut on its own. She wants me to adapt the method right here, in the middle of the lunch setup, while the dishwasher runs and the hallway clock ticks louder than usual, its sound threading through the clatter of pans from the line. The pressure builds in my chest like steam trapped under a lid. The recipe sketch she hands me is neat, too neat, like it came from a phone note instead of a margin, the lines crisp and unforgiving under the overhead lights. I stare at the list and try to picture the solitude step, the way the thyme needed the trail and the steam alone, the way the ridge wind would strip away everything else until only the ingredients remained. Skipping it feels wrong already, a small fracture running through the day, but Ines is smiling and the banners smell like fresh ink and sun-warmed cotton, and the inn needs something that pulls people in before the season slips away. I start chopping anyway, the knife hitting the board in uneven rhythms because my hands keep wanting to count instead of cut, each strike echoing the uneven beat of my pulse. The thyme leaves release their sharp, pine-rich scent too soon, without the slow release that comes from walking at first. Midway through the sauce, the noise from the dining room leaks in chairs scraping across tile, a guest asking about Wi-Fi, with the particular impatience of someone already checking their phone, and the interior monologue I'd been holding back spikes hard, if I can't even hold the attunement for one dish. How am I supposed to hold the whole inn or the scholarship or the version of me that left and came back different? The thought sits like salt on the tongue I didn't add yet, sharp and accusing. I stir faster, skipping the step where I would have walked the ridge alone with nothing but the journal's quiet instructions and the wind, and the pan hisses like it knows, steam rising in a sudden plume that fogs the pass window. The scallops hit the plates looking fine, arranged with the careful precision that usually masks deeper flaws, but the first one back from the floor is over-salted, and the server doesn't even try to soften it, just sets the plate down with a small, tight exhale. 2 more follow before the rush peaks, and the tickets start stacking at the pass in a ragged pile that grows with each return dish. Whale appears without a word, standing rigid with the towel already moving in tight circles on the stainless steel, her shoulders locked as though any looseness might let the whole kitchen collapse. Ines is still there, gesturing wide about permanent menu spots and how the banners will draw the weekend crowd, her bright voice slowing only when she notices the returned plates, the color in her cheeks shifting from excitement to something more guarded. I stay at the counter. Apron ties twisted twice around my fingers until the circulation pricks at my skin, staring at the tickets instead of the room. Eye contact feels impossible when every table can see the steam rising wrong from the pans, carrying the sharp edge of over-reduced reduction. Vin slides in from the side, leaning against the counter with that usual easy tilt, telling a table the scallops just needed a second pass and offering a quick story about the ridge time that makes them laugh, his hands moving in light, illustrative gestures. When he glances at me, the humor drops out of his voice for half a second, the line of his shoulders straightening before he turns back to charm another order, the change in his posture so slight only I would notice. Ines folds her hands for the first time all morning, the gesture deliberate and contained. "Nor, are you okay?" she asks, the words spaced out like she's actually waiting, her gaze steady now instead of darting. I nod once, the same way Gade does when he's done listening, and the motion feels mechanical. A hinge that has been oiled too many times. The dining room keeps moving around us, silverware clinking in uneven rhythms, while Lael wipes the same 6 inches of counter like the motion is the only thing keeping the whole place upright. After the last ticket clears, Lael tacks a new sheet to the corkboard by the pass. All menu changes require her sign-off first. The paper is plain, the letters blocky and unyielding, and it lands without any extra words, the tack biting into the board with a soft finality. Ines doesn't argue, just rolls the banners back up, slower than she unrolled them, the fabric whispering against itself. I finish wiping the station with the same circular motion Lael used, counting each pass under my breath until the numbers blur into the next task. The repetition, a thin shield against the growing quiet in my head. Close comes late. The inn empties, and the dishwasher finally quiets, leaving the hallway clock to mark every second with deliberate weight. I pull my phone from the apron pocket once the lights are low and type the message to Vin without reading it twice. I can't keep doing both. The screen stays lit long enough for the reply to land before I can tuck the phone away. Then don't. The period sits at the end like it's been there waiting, a small, immovable weight. Upstairs, the journal is open on the bed where I left it this morning, pages fanned from how many times I reached for it and pulled back. A new line has appeared in the margin, the ink still damp at the edge, rushed attunement sours more than the dish. The words line up with the salt still on my tongue and the banners still leaning against the wall downstairs, their frayed edges catching the low light. I close the cover, but the sentence stays, pressing against the choice that keeps widening between the in and whatever version of me keeps trying to leave. Chapter 6. The pot sits on the low flame exactly where I left it last night, the thyme oil still clinging to the rim like it refuses to let go. I tip in the new batch of wild thyme, nor sourced alone, and watch the leaves sink without a sound. Geed stands at the far end of the counter with his arms crossed, saying nothing, while I adjust the dial one click lower than the recipe card demands. The kitchen holds the weight of yesterday's failure in every surface. The scarred cutting boards, the faint scorch marks along the bent hood, the way the evening light slants through the small window and turns the steam into something fragile. My shoulders ache from the repetition of stirring, tasting, discarding, yet the rhythm feels necessary now, a quiet defiance against the memory of that bitter batch. My fingers find the apron ties and twist them once, twice, the knot tightening against my hip. The heat creeps up the sides too fast again, the way it did when the first attempt turned bitter on the tongue. I reach for the spoon but stop short, remembering how the last batch stuck to the metal and pulled the flavor sideways. The air carries the sharp green of thyme undercut by the threat of overcooking, a thin line I have crossed too many times. Geedy's silence presses against the back of my neck, not heavy but constant, like a held breath. Geedy clears his throat once, short and dry. Lower by half again. The words land like a single coin on tile. I twist the knob without looking at him and count the seconds until the bubbles slow to a lazy roll. The correction feels small, but the surface smooths out, the steam rising cleaner now, carrying the pine edge of the thyme without the scorch underneath. Something in my chest loosens. The first clean note I've tasted since the festival pitch fell flat. I taste again, letting the liquid rest on my tongue longer than before. The balance arrives without the usual rush of doubt. Bright, steady, carrying the mountain resin in a way that feels earned rather than forced. I lift the spoon and taste. The judgment returns in one quiet step, the balance sitting right where it should, no apology needed. Gide watches the steam curl and nods once, the motion so small it barely shifts his shoulders. The approval settles between us without fanfare, a single thread of permission that lets the rest of the evening breathe easier. Service ends with the last plate cleared and Lael already wiping the same stretch of counter 3 times over. The dining room beyond the pass has emptied, chairs pushed in at angles that speak of hurried departures and satisfied silences. Vin lingers by the pass, one hip against the stainless edge, the way he always does when he means to stay. He wipes his hands on the towel but doesn't fold it, just holds it between his palms like it might anchor him. His eyes track the last of the steam rising from the cooling pot, and the usual easy grin sits half-formed, waiting. This place sits on me different than the old shop ever did, he says, voice carrying that light cadence that drops when the words matter. Like it wants me here instead of just letting me pass through. He shifts his weight, the towel twisting once more between his fingers. I catch the flicker of something unguarded in the set of his mouth before he smooths it away. I almost ask what happened to the family business that brought him to the mountain in the first place, the question already shaped on my tongue. He catches the shift in my face and flicks the towel once, the motion easy again. These aprons are forever if you keep letting me wash them wrong. The joke lands soft, a deliberate turn that leaves the door cracked but not open. I let it stand, the unsaid words settling into the space between us like sediment. Upstairs, the journal waits open on the quilt, the new margin line written in the same careful hand as the others. The final recipes need family voices at the table. I trace the sentence with one fingertip, the paper cool beneath the skin. The letters sit heavier than the thyme on my tongue, pressing against the space I've been trying to keep for the version of me that left for school. The room feels smaller with the words exposed, the faint scent of cedar from the wardrobe mingling with the distant kitchen smells rising through the floorboards. The fear rises the same way it always does, tight behind my ribs, but it settles this time into something with an edge, a line I can trace. I close the cover and carry the words back downstairs where Geed still stands by the empty pass. The kitchen has cooled, the lights dimmed to a single bulb above the sink. I'll keep working through the pages, I tell him, but the choices stay mine. The declaration comes out steadier than I expect, each syllable measured against the quiet. Guy listens without interrupting, arms still crossed, the nod arriving only after the last word lands. His eyes hold mine for a beat longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement that carries no argument. Vin straightens from his lean shoulders, pulling back the way they do when he drops the joke. I'll source the next one, he says. You don't have to go alone. The offer sits plain between us, no flourish, only the steady weight of someone choosing to stay. I take it without the usual string of reasons why I should handle it myself. The acceptance sits between us, new and plain, and he doesn't smile, but the line of his mouth softens. My phone buzzes once in the apron pocket. Inez's name lights the screen with the start of a question about the sudden quiet. I slide it back without opening the thread, the unread words a small knot I choose to leave tied for now. Guidi turns toward the hallway, and Vin stays where he is, both of them waiting like the next move belongs to me now. Tell me what you actually left behind when you came here, I say. The question hangs in the cooled air, the single bulb catching the edge of Vin's towel as it stills between his hands. Chapter 7. The ledger snapped shut under Lael's palm, the sound cutting through the office's quiet like a lid on a cooling pot. Dust motes drift in the lamplight, stirred by the motion, and the faint creak of the old desk chair follows as she shifts her weight. I step forward before the silence can settle again, apron ties twisted tight between my fingers. The fabric bites into my skin, a small, grounding discomfort. The rumors about selling, are they true? What are the actual debt numbers? Lael looks up from the desk, her shoulders locking straight. The pen rolls once across the wood before she catches it, her fingers closing around it with deliberate care. For a moment, she studies the grain of the desk rather than meeting my eyes. Those numbers only matter if you stay long enough to fix them. I hold her gaze even though the old habit pulls at me to look away. The memory of the attunement sits fresh, the way her lost scholarship tasted like salt and regret on the time. That afternoon's flavor still lingers at the back of my throat whenever I breathe too deeply. You gave up that chance once. Why push the same weight onto me now? Her mouth tightens, but she stays seated, one hand flat on the closed book. The fan in the corner clicks through its slow turn, moving air that smells faintly of old paper and the last of the day's bread. Somewhere beneath the surface, her pulse shows in the faint twitch at her jaw. She draws in a breath that never quite releases. That was different. The scholarship was never meant to keep the doors open here. You're the one who walked back in carrying the ledger like it belonged to you. The words hang between us, testing. I feel the pull of the time again, the attunement's echo pressing against my ribs. It'd show me her older loss in sharp fragments. The crisp paper of acceptance letters turned to ash, the quiet calculations that followed when the money ran out. I didn't walk back in to inherit your unfinished choices. I came because you asked, but the ask keeps changing shape every time I try to hold it. Lael's thumb traces the edge of the ledger cover once, a slow, absent motion. Her posture remains rigid, yet something in her eyes flickers, a brief narrowing that suggests the flinch she refuses to show fully. The office feels smaller for the weight of what neither of us names aloud. Vin pushes the door open with his shoulder, a small sack of peppercorns balanced against his chest. The peppercorns rattle faintly inside, their sharp, woody scent cutting through the bread and paper. The words come out before either of us can stop them. I lost my family's shop exactly like this. Debt piling up while everyone pretended it was still fine. Lael stands so fast the chair legs scrape across the floorboards, the sound harsh in the enclosed space. She glances between us once, the look sharp enough to cut. Color rises along her neck, though her voice stays level. If that's how you see it, Noor, bringing in outsiders to argue your side, then we're done here. She steps past Vin without another word and pulls the door closed behind her, the latch clicking with finality that echoes longer than it should. The peppercorns shift in the sack as Vin sets it on the desk. He leans against the edge the way he always does, then straightens when the quiet stretches. One hand lifts to rub the back of his neck before dropping again. The inn is the first place that's felt steady since the shop closed. I didn't plan on saying that out loud. My fingers work the apron ties loose and then pull them tight again. The weight of his words lands against the space where my own plans still float unanchored. I can taste the difference now. The time attunement had carried Lael's old loss, but Vin's version sits heavier, like dough that refuses to rise. The office seems to expand around the absence of Lael's presence, yet the walls press closer with everything left unsaid between the three of us. I watch the way Vin's gaze lingers on the ledger's edge, where the single coin remains visible, and wonder how many versions of the same story are already buried in this room. He doesn't fill the pause with a joke. Instead, he watches the ledger where Lael left it, the edge of one coin visible beneath the cover. His shoulders settle lower, the movement small but deliberate, as if measuring the distance between his old loss and this new ground. I'll source whatever you need next, no pressure to decide tonight. I nod once, the motion small. The office feels larger with Lael gone, yet the air still presses close around the unsaid parts. Vin's belonging here presses against my own uncertainty, two roots claiming the same patch of soil. I trace the knot in one apron tie with my thumb, the fabric rough beneath my skin, and feel the attunement's residue stir again, mixing the salt of Lael's past with the heavier stillness Vin carries. Later, after the kitchen shuts down and the last guest footsteps fade, I open the journal again in my room. The new margin note runs in tighter script than before. Attunement breaks when two people claim the same roots differently. The words sit alone on the page, the ink still faintly damp at one edge. My lamp casts a narrow circle that leaves the corners of the room in shadow, and the floorboards cool beneath my bare feet as I shift my weight. My phone lights on the nightstand. Vin's text arrives without the usual teasing line at the end, just good night. I type back a single period and set the phone face down. The screen dims, leaving the room quieter than before. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaks once and settles. The hallway light stays on beneath Lael's door long after midnight, a thin stripe that doesn't move. I lie still, the journal closed on my lap, listening for any shift that might mean she's still working through the same numbers I refuse to claim tonight. The stripe of light holds steady, unbroken, while the rest of the inn breathes around its edges. Chapter 8. The spoon hovered above the broth, its surface trembling from the faint simmer below. Nor lowered it anyway. Gedde's warning about the one attunement limit had echoed through the kitchen that morning, steady and unyielding as the mountain wind. Yet the booking deadline pressed 2 days closer and the reservation book still held only 3 crossed-out names from the week before. She reached past the wild thyme scattered across the cutting board, its sharp green scent already thinning in the steam, and pulled the dried roots from the back of the spice drawer where she had tucked them the night before. Her fingers brushed the drawer's rough interior, catching on a splinter that pricked her skin and drew a single bead of blood she wiped away without thinking. The mortar felt cool and solid under her palm as she ground the roots into powder. Each turn of the pestle released a faint, bitter dust that clung to her fingertips. She tipped the powder into the pot already carrying the last of the mountain celery, then watched the surface swirl once before settling. The journal lay open beside the stove, its final margin note catching the overhead light. Attunement breaks when two people claim the same roots differently. She stirred the broth in a slow circle, the steam rising in a narrow column that caught the light and vanished against the ceiling. Doubt flickered at the edge of her thoughts. What if the limit held? What if the roots refused to answer twice? Yet the empty dining room waited, and the deadline offered no reprieve. The first sip burned the back of her tongue. Heat flared, then a white flash tore through the roof of her mouth, wiping every layer of flavor clean in a single instant. She lifted the spoon again. The broth sat flat and empty on her tongue. No salt, no earth, no trace of the roots she had just added. Her fingers tightened around the handle until the metal warmed to her skin and the tendons in her wrist ached. The taste of nothing spread, a hollow space that left her stomach clenching in protest, as though the failure had lodged there instead. Geed stepped through the swinging door without knocking. His arms crossed over his chest before the door settled, the fabric of his sleeves pulling tight at the elbows. He watched the spoon drop into the sink and the last of the broth spiral down the drain. The inn has survived worse than one bad week, he said, the words short and even, carrying no extra breath. His gaze lingered on the empty pot, then shifted to her face, reading the tremor she tried to hide in her shoulders. Nor kept her eyes on the drain. The counter edge pressed into her hip where she leaned too hard, the wood grain biting through her apron. Outside the window, the parking lot gravel showed fresh tire tracks from the morning delivery that had never become guests. She wondered how many times Gade had stood in this same spot, watching someone else's failed attempt swirl away. The question pressed against her ribs. Had he seen this exact collapse before, or was her version uniquely final? Vin pushed through next. 3 folded reservation slips in his hand instead of the usual grin. His shoulders sat lower than they had the day before. Mrs. Mundard 20-thighed. Patel's cousin booked the whole back dining room for Thursday, he said, voice flat, the teasing cadence stripped away. 2 more for the weekend from the hardware store owner who remembered the old pie contest. He placed the slips on the counter one by one, each movement deliberate, as if the paper itself might tear. His eyes flicked toward the journal, then away, leaving an unspoken test hanging in the air between them. Nor opened her mouth to answer, but the words caught somewhere between her throat and the empty pot. Heat rose behind her eyes, then faded. All she managed was to hold out the spoon, still wet from the sink, the metal catching the light like a useless mirror. Vin's gaze moved from the spoon to her face and stayed there, unreadable. She felt the weight of his restraint, the way he withheld the half-smile that usually softened these moments, and the silence stretched until her pulse thudded in her ears. Gede nodded once at Vin, the motion small and final. He turned to the prep station, lifted the knife, and began chopping onions without another look her way. The rhythm of the blade filled the space where conversation should have gone. Steady, precise, each cut releasing a clean, sharp scent that cut through the fading steam. Noor stayed by the stove, apron ties twisted around her fingers until the fabric bit into her knuckles. She watched the onions fall into even half-moons and wondered what price the gesture carried, what silent agreement had passed between the 2 men while she stood frozen. Lael appeared in the doorway, ledger tucked under one arm. She flipped through the blank pages once, the sound crisp as dry leaves. "We may close early this season," she said, measured, as if reading a weather report. No sense heating the whole place for empty tables. Her eyes moved over the 3 new slips, lingered, then returned to the ledger without comment. The pause before she spoke again felt deliberate, a small mercy or a test, Noor could not tell which. Noor stepped into the kitchen doorway, the ties now limp against her palms. The realization settled slowly, like a missing step found too late. Nothing left to offer the inn, the journal, or the 3 new reservations that still felt borrowed. Her shoulders pulled inward without her asking them to. The air in the hallway behind her felt cooler than the kitchen, carrying the faint scent of old wood and the single coin Lael had left on the ledger earlier. She traced the edge of the doorframe with one thumb, the wood worn smooth by years of hands passing through, and felt the same smoothness now offered no purchase. Vin set his hand on the counter edge, not quite touching hers, his fingers spread wide, anchoring against the wood. "The inn is not the only thing that can be lost tonight," he said, the sentence landing without any lift at the end. The words hung between them, heavy enough that the knife on the prep station paused for one beat before resuming its steady rhythm. Noor felt the sentence settle against her ribs, shifting something she had not named until that moment. The journal stayed open on the far counter, its last page blank and refusing to fill no matter how long she stared. The single coin on the ledger caught the light from the hallway, still visible, still unmoved. Noor turned toward the door, but the floorboards creaked under her weight the same way they had last night when the light stayed on beneath Lael's room. She paused in the threshold, listening to the knife, the faint tick of cooling metal from the empty pot, and the silence that followed every word none of them had said. The blank page waited like an unanswered question, and she could not bring herself to turn back and face it. Chapter 9. Chapter title, Community Meal Mediation. Noor lingers in the dim hallway, the phone's glow carving a small rectangle against her palm. Her thumbs hover above the screen, the message already drafted but not yet sent. She rereads it once, twice, tasting the metal-sharp edge of indecision on her tongue. Community meal tomorrow, or the inn closes. The words feel final in a way that makes her stomach tighten, yet she taps send before the hesitation can reclaim her. The device clatters softly onto the counter. She turns away from it at once, as though distance might blunt the consequences, and begins unfolding the long table in the main room. The wood releases a faint scent of lemon oil from last week's polish, sharp and clean beneath her fingertips. She works methodically, each motion measured, her breath shallow. At one end she places Lael's ledger, its leather cover still cool from the earlier meeting, the spine stiff with years of careful entries. At the opposite end she sets Innes's festival notes, the papers already curling at the edges from repeated handling, faint creases mapping the urgency of too many revisions. Between them she arranges plates in even rows, each one catching the overhead light in a small white square that shifts as she moves. The room holds the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, and the occasional creak of settling beams overhead. Noor pauses to straighten a fork that refuses to lie flat, her fingers lingering on the cool metal. Lael arrives first, the front door easing open with a whisper of hinges. She wipes her hands on a dish towel, even though they look clean, the fabric twisting between her palms in a gesture that speaks of nerves she will not name. She stands rigid by the doorway, shoulders square beneath the faded cardigan she wears like armor. Her eyes flick to the ledger, then to Noor before settling on the empty chair waiting at the head of the table. Any compromise still requires Noor to stay, she says, the words landing flat like an item on an invoice, no room for negotiation in the cadence. Noor feels the sentence settle against her ribs, a familiar weight she has carried since the first conversation about the inn's future. She does not answer immediately. Instead, she adjusts a plate that needs no adjusting, buying seconds while the pulse in her wrists quickens. Lael remains motionless, the dish towel now folded neatly over one forearm, her posture daring interruption. Ines comes through the back entrance a minute later, the door swinging wider than necessary. Her bright scarf slips off one shoulder, the fabric catching on the strap of her bag before she rights it. She slows when she sees the setup, the deliberate placement of objects across the table, and folds her hands in front of her. The motion looks practiced, a shield against the tension already thickening the air. Shared events can keep the inn open without chaining Noor forever, she offers, her voice picking up speed, then tapering as she glances between them. The words hang for a moment, testing the space. Ines shifts her weight, one foot sliding forward as though she might step closer, then thinks better of it. Noor moves to the kitchen threshold, retrieving the reconciled dish she prepared earlier. Thyme has been folded into the sauce, so the old and new flavors sit beside each other without fighting, the aroma rising in gentle layers of earth and brightness. She carries the bowls one by one, setting them down with deliberate care, the ceramic warm against her palms. Only then does she meet both women's eyes once before looking away, the contact brief enough to avoid invitation. "I will support the inn on my own schedule, or not at all," she says, the sentence coming out steadier than the pulse in her wrist suggests. Inside, the words echo with the shape of a boundary she has rehearsed alone in the dark. Lael's posture stays tight, a muscle flickering at the corner of her jaw until the first guests arrive. Their voices carry across the table as they praise the blend, the mixture of familiar comfort and unexpected notes drawing comments that ripple outward. Something in Lael's face shifts, a small crack that lets the corners of her mouth soften for a moment, the rigidity easing by fractions. Gede mediates the seating without speaking, his presence a quiet anchor as he gestures with open palms toward empty chairs. He nods once when the women reach for the same serving spoon at the same time, the motion economical, approval granted in silence rather than speech. Vinhe moves between tables, easing tension with quiet introductions instead of jokes. He leans against the counter edge when he passes Noor, the brief contact steadying, before straightening abruptly when Lael looks over. The room fills with the low scrape of chairs and the clink of glasses, the kind of ordinary noise that makes the earlier silence feel farther away. Noor remains near the kitchen threshold, close enough to hear the conversations threading through the space, yet far enough that no one asks her to decide anything else tonight. She watches Ines gesture expansively toward the festival notes, fingers tracing imagined routes across the paper, then fold her hands again when Lael asks a direct question about dates. The ledger stays open at the head of the table, its pages no longer blank, but marked with new entries in Lael's careful script, each line added with the slow deliberation of someone testing new ground. The meal stretches into the evening, the reconciled dish disappearing bowl by bowl as guests linger near the windows, talking about mountain trails and upcoming events that might bring more visitors through the doors. Lael agrees to split management before the last plates are cleared, her voice still measured but without the earlier finality, the concession emerging between bites and shared glances. Ines promises traditional dishes on the festival menu in return, her rapid speech slowing as she writes the details on the back of one of her notes, the pen pressing firmly enough to leave indentations on the wood beneath. Guide nods once more from his seat at the side, arms crossed but no longer blocking the conversation, his approval registered in the gradual uncrossing of his ankles. Noor steps outside afterward, the cool air pressing against her sleeves like a reminder of the world beyond the inn's walls. The journal rests on the windowsill, where moonlight reaches it, a new line appearing under the glow, as if written by the light itself. She reads it once, the words settling into the quiet space she has kept guarded. Anxiety still hums beneath her skin, yet it no longer decides her next breath. She turns when she hears footsteps behind her, the sound measured and familiar. "The choice is made daily, not once," Spin says from the doorway, his voice carrying the light teasing cadence that softens on the last word, leaving room for her to answer or simply stand in the shared stillness. Chapter 10. The pan hisses as I slide the thyme sprigs into the oil, watching them curl without reaching for the journal propped on the far counter. Dawn leaks through the kitchen window in thin stripes, catching on the metal tang pots above the stove, and the scent of wild herbs rises sharp enough to cut through the leftover steam from last night's dishes. My hands move on their own, cracking an egg into the bowl, the yolk sliding whole the way Giddy once showed me years ago, when the inn still felt like the only place that fit. The yolk's surface trembles under the morning chill that clings to the bowl's rim, and I breathe in the faint trace of wood smoke still embedded in the walls from the night fire. For the first time, the motions require no map, no whispered reminder from ink that has guided every choice since the attunement. Lael's footsteps come before I expect them, soft on the tile, and she stops at the ledger without saying anything first. She uncaps her pen and writes across the bottom row in her tight script, splitting the morning shifts between us like it's always been this way. The paper creaks under the pressure of her hand, each stroke deliberate, the ink settling into the grain as though the page itself accepts the new division. Her shoulders remain level, but I notice the slight hesitation before the final period, a silence that hints at words she chooses not to add. "You're early," she says, measured as ever, but the words land lighter than they used to. Her gaze flicks to the stove, then back to the ledger, and she wipes a streak of flour from the edge of the counter with the same cloth she always uses, the motion slow enough that I hear the faint rasp of cotton against wood. I stir the mixture once more before answering. The recipe felt ready without looking it up. The admission sits between us, and she nods, not pushing further. Still, her fingers linger on the cloth a moment longer than necessary, and I wonder what she withholds behind that quiet acceptance. The kitchen air grows warmer as the herbs release their oils, the scent threading through the space between us like an unasked question. Ines bursts through the side door a minute later, arms full of printed flyers that still smell like fresh toner. She spreads them across a prep table, and the top one lists me as guest chef for the festival weekend, the title printed bold under the inn's name. No mention of permanent anything. The paper edges curl slightly from the warmth of her grip, and she smooths them flat with quick, efficient palms, her breath visible in the cooler draft that follows her inside. "Printed these at the shop last night after we talked," she says, her speech quick but slowing when she catches Lael's eye. "Routes are set, and the menu notes match what you wrote on the back of my old list." Her fingers tap the edge of one flyer twice, a small restless beat, before she steps back to let the print settle under the overhead light. Gede leans in the doorway, arms already crossed, listening without interrupting, as Ines points out the schedule. When she finishes, he nods once, the movement small but clear, and uncrosses his ankles to step fully inside. The boards beneath his boots give a single low creak, and he remains near the threshold, his presence steady as the steam rising from the pan. Vin arrives last, sliding past Ged to rest against the counter the way he always does, shoulders loose until the talk turns to the inn's books. "This place gave me work when I had nothing left from the old shop," he says, the teasing cadence dropping away on the last word so the sentence lands plain. "Didn't expect it to feel like starting over in a good way." His thumb traces the counter's grain once, eyes on the flyers rather than any of us, and the quiet that follows holds the weight of what remains unsaid about the shop he left behind. The old pull tightens in my chest at the idea of choosing, and my fingers find the apron ties at my waist. I stop before twisting them into knots, letting the fabric fall loose instead. The anxiety flickers but doesn't take hold the way it used to when the journal was the only map. I watch the ties sway once, then still, and the motion steadies something inside me that has been off balance for months. I'm splitting time, I tell them all, the words coming after a short pause while I measure the right flavor for it. In duties half the week, then back to the recipes that are mine alone starting tomorrow. Not all or nothing. The sentence hangs, and no one corrects the balance I've drawn. Lael's pen remains capped now, her attention fixed on a single spot on the ledger she has already written, while Ines shifts her weight from one foot to the other. Lael's shoulders stay straight, but her voice cracks on the single word. "Good." Before she turns back to the counter and scrubs at a spot that isn't really there. The ledger stays open between us, her new lines settling beside the old ones, and I catch the faint tremor in her wrist before it stills again. The final page of the journal fills while we stand there, ink appearing under the morning light without anyone touching it. Belonging is chosen daily. I read it once, the line fitting the space I've kept guarded since the attunement in the woods, the letters forming with the same deliberate care Lael used on the ledger. No one speaks as the ink dries. Outside on the porch, the mountain light shifts across the railings, and the weight of what I've said settles across my shoulders without pressing down the way duty used to. The air carries the same cool reminder of trails beyond the inn, yet the choice feels steadier now that it's spoken. Pine needles shift in a low breeze against the steps, their dry rustle marking the passage of minutes I no longer count by someone else's rules. My phone buzzes with Inez's group photo from the meal, everyone still around the table with the reconciled dish between them. I save it instead of swiping the notification away, the image staying in the folder with the others from this week, the faces caught in mid-conversation under the dining room lamp. The inn bell rings sharp from the front desk, the first booking of the season coming through before the breakfast rush starts. I answer it myself, the receiver cool against my ear, and book the dates without checking the ledger first, the pen moving across the reservation book in lines that belong only to the day ahead.